Mhm.
All right, good evening. The February 14th meeting of the Lower Macungie Township Planning Commission is now called to order. Happy Valentine's Day. There is one change on tonight's agenda, agenda item number 4. Spring Creek Estates Lot 2 and Lot 4 has been removed from the agenda at the applicant's request. So that item is removed from the agenda. First up is approval of the minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes, the minutes from December 13th, that was our regular meeting, and also our regular meeting of January 10th. Are there any changes or corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes of December 13th, our regular meeting, as presented?
So moved.
So motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further comment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Next, we'll take up the January 10th meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the January 10th regular meeting as presented? Is there a motion? Motion by Rudy. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Bob. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Next up is Lehigh Valley Town Center sketch plan. And there's also a zoning ordinance amendment that's associated with this project. Nate, you want to do a review?
Happy to, sir. So as everybody may remember and recall, we've had visitation from our applicants several times already with respect to this proposed ordinance modification and sketch plan for a future land development off of Cedar Brook Road. The requested zone change includes allowing mixed-use developments in the HE commercials in the HE zoning district, highway enterprise. If you all remember back to when we were doing our rezoning in 19, I think one of the best terms that came up when we were talking about this area of the township, it is potentially our future economic breadbasket as a community. There's a lot of opportunity for economic development here. And when the option for a mixed use came up, and then as we all now know as well, Topgolf is an anchor user, that foresight really came into being. However, we didn't include mixed use the first time around. So that's really what this is intent on doing, making sure that that particular use can fit in there. While we had looked at previous iterations of language that had allowances for the Topgolf, allowances for the mixed use structures with that Main Street concept that we had looked at before. We had heard from Luke Jandal with the Jandal Group that when it became public, there was a significant amount of interest from other users. And that's actually, given the state of the economy and whatnot, great news for us. However, we did hear that in addition to the Topgolf, the mixed use golf driving range, there was discussions about a performance venue, potential aquarium, and a mixed-use sports retail establishment, which would be experiential in nature. All those would be other anchor tenants as well, which would further bolster that Main Street we're trying to achieve. We also talked about the number of units that would be necessary at the site to make the small coffee shops on the first floor work, with the recognition that obviously traffic and sewer obviously play into that as well. But at the end of the day, it's a possibility so long as infrastructure needs can be met. So we're taking our calculation under the proposed language based off of the gross lot area, the tract area, as opposed to what we normally do with the net out. And we do believe that after many discussions that would basically take care of the number of units that would be necessary, as well as the potential anchor users that we're now looking at. So the language before you this evening covers those basic points. I would lead it to Attorney Schock to talk about it in greater detail, but I will tell you this much: with the amount of time that staff has spent on this and fine tuning, we do feel that this iteration of the language is set to go, and we'll continue to move forward on the project that we're trying to basically assemble this top mixed use development, which would be not like anything else we've seen here in the Valley or potentially the state. So we are supportive of the language and feel that it was ready to move forward this evening.
Are there any engineering comments on the project?
Because this was zoning related, we did not have any input on the review of this document.
Yep.
Turn it over to Attorney Schock. If you just want to introduce yourself and your team.
Sure. Eric Schock, Fitzpatrick Munson Buba, John McRoberts, who you've seen before, is the engineer on the project. And then with me is Luke and David Jandal, who are the developers. And an accurate and perfect assessment by Mr. Jones. Just a couple of things that I would add preliminarily, which is, if you recall, you did make a recommendation on the prior iteration. That included a recommendation with some suggested changes. We made all of those changes. So originally, we took what had been the ordinance before you. We took your recommendations, like, for example, clarifying the language on the signage, tweaking the hours down a bit. We did all of that initially. And then, as Mr. Jones said, what essentially happened, and Luke Jan will be glad to provide more detail on this, but what happened was, word has gotten out, and we wanted to really clarify two things. Number one, as you'll see, we worked with staff back and forth with the solicitor, with Nate Jones, and with Carl Best, to make sure that we had an ordinance that allowed the breadth of uses that seem to be coming and wanting to locate in this kind of development. Each time we talked with staff and said, do you think this is something that you think would work for what is envisioned here? And things like the performance venue, the aquarium, et cetera, all seemed to work. So we've added language that would make all of those potential uses, with obviously Planning Commission review and BOC approval, allowed in this. We also accommodated by some of the language the fact that that venue might not be able to be part of the Main Street, but needs to be incorporated into the Main Street, even if it's a single tenant. So that's why that language was added, because I think perfect example is like the experiential retail / sports facility. That is larger than what would be typical for a standalone building that you might find in here, except it's exactly like what is envisioned in these types of communities. And I'm pretty sure, and Luke can give you more detail, there are other instances where that's what's happened with the Topgolf as the focus, which is you've ended up things with like racing facility. Those types of uses like to locate, for obvious reasons, by a Topgolf. So we accommodated that with the change. And then the last one was, and again, I'm sure Luke can add more detail, is the number of units in these types of communities when they get these types of users and get this facility needs to be more than what we were originally envisioning. And I think that's come from Luke having really what I would call more earnest and serious discussions, because those didn't result until people said, oh, it looks like the Topgolf is going forward. Now it's time to really, start sharpening the pencils and figure out what we can do with this. So that led us to come back to staff and say, look, hold off a little bit, because we've got to try to accommodate these, because what we didn't want to do is keep coming back with we've got this ordinance, and then coming and saying, well, geez, look at this amazing thing we've got, but unfortunately we forgot to accommodate some of these in the ordinance. So the goal was to be as inclusive as we could. Obviously, it still comes, we need the ordinance passed, we need conditional use approval, but I think we're at a point where we have made it as flexible as we need it, based upon the conversations that Luke Jandal has been having with real people, real businesses, real developers, to work with them to do these kinds of communities. So that brings us here today. We redid a sketch for the, if the board would want to see it, but in conversations with Mr. Jones, there will still be moving parts when we get to the conditional use. We can show you what it might now look like, but by the same token, what was more important to us was getting the language of the ordinance before you, getting that on to the commissioners to give them a chance to say, we're ready to advertise this, and then get to our hearing on it. So I'm glad for questions. I will leave either the discussions with all of the potential users to Luke, or any of the engineering details I will certainly prefer that Mr. McRoberts answer those than me. So with that, I would say questions.
Why don't we hear what the potential uses are? It sounds like some things have changed since you were last before us.
Sure. Disclosing the exact type of uses, I think would be premature. I mean, obviously, we've talked about the Topgolf. Since that news has sort of broke publicly, there's been other, there's been other, there's been other, call it experiential, retail users. I think, post-COVID, the retail industry has tried to become, adaptive to the changing of times and Amazon online. And so, we find a lot of these users that have come to us been complimentary in communications with the township, a sports entertainment user, two-story building. And they have a platform that is, sports retail, but more of an experiential component to it, which would have, you want to try a baseball bat, you put the VR headset on, you go in and somebody pitches to you. That kind of concept, rock climbing, you have a 45-foot tall rock climbing, you want to try on the apparel, things like that, where you get immersed in that turf field, you run on the turf field, you try on the cleats. That type of concept. The aquarium came to us as well, a comedy club. And so, those are the kind of uses that we've had conversations with, which, impact part of the ordinance that you had before you. We want to have more of a proactive approach as opposed to a reactive. Let's include the conversations we've had that we think would be complementary uses to the township as part of this mixed use lifestyle development, all at one shot instead of going back and forth and piecemealing it. That kind of was the proactive approach for us. And so we were like, okay, let's reach out to the township and have that conversation.
So you're saying that maybe this project looks more like an entertainment center rather than a retail commercial?
I wouldn't say that. Nope. I think I would say some of the uses that we've communicated with the larger anchor users, as Nate suggested, 2 or 3 would have an entertainment component to it. But there is no doubt we need to have that walkable lifestyle core retail, the boutique coffee shops, the gym opportunities and lifestyle as part of this. There's no doubt that that's going to be the foundation of our success.
Open it up for some questions from the planning commission.
And if I could just make one,
Yeah.
Mr. Blau, of what he said, and Mr. Roberts can jump. We didn't change the language that would still obligate us to have the showcase buildings down the center. So in other words, these were additions. It was not supplanting what we were originally visioning with that.
The rendering looks the same as what we had last time we were in front of the planning commission. We're still going to have that mixed use with the residential and the walkable community. As Eric pointed out, we've adjusted the sketch to reflect some of these additional users, the sports component. We have at the end of that pedestrian corridor as kind of the destination. That's the 2 anchors on either end, Topgolf's to the north, and then the second user to the south. We still have that corridor of retail on the first floor, several different shops, walkable with the residential above. So still generally the same concept. There was a limitation on the building sizes, and that's what we had eliminated and clarified some of these additional uses, just to make sure that there's no miscommunication down the line when we do want to have one of these really unique users that doesn't fit exactly with the definitions in the ordinance for just a retail component or just entertainment. It's really a mix, and we want to make sure that that was all clarified in the language of the ordinance, like Eric said, so we're not coming back to change 1 or 2 words once we're in the conditional use or land development process. We want to, once we get done with the ordinance amendments, we're ready to hit the ground running and get into conditional use and start pursuing the outside agencies, PennDOT and PDS permits those, so we get Topgolf underway.
It looks like you got rid of the gas station.
We did. One of the critical keys to this development is going to be the PennDOT approval, traffic management. We're working on that right now. We're going to work through that with PennDOT. We'll work that through that with the township engineer during the conditional use process, during the scoping process, during the HOP process. The township's very involved. Township engineer, CKS, Andy Heinrich, they'll be very involved throughout that process. So that's one of the keys, but the gas station was a big traffic generator. That's probably needs to be pushed to the side so we can incorporate some of these other uses to make the traffic manageable.
I think you had a question.
Yeah, just a question for Luke. Luke, sounds like you have some really wonderful interests from some outstanding users at a time, especially when things are difficult in the retail industry, like you said, post-COVID. What do you attribute that interest in? Is it the location that everyone likes? Is it the demographics? Is it, your ability to work well with the municipality, all of the above?
Yeah, I think access to infrastructure is key.
Mhm.
I think the township is a large part of that. The success in residential and the school district is big. I would say the Topgolf use as a whole, I think, has been a big driver for us. And then the idea behind this walkable town center makes it very appealing. As part of that project. I mean, that's been really the high level conversations we've had, and it's really driving a lot of the interest.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about it a couple different times, about the uniqueness of the location and the scale and the size of it. And what we're all envisioning along with the township is to be something extremely special, something that, we haven't really seen in this community. And that's really what's taken on the interest, different perspective of living and a different, a different perspective of lifestyle. And that's really where it's gone.
Luke, what are you, all hoping to get from us tonight?
Well, I think we'd be looking, for a recommendation, for this project to move in the right direction and keep it, on task if we could. That'd be appreciated.
Recommendation to whom?
Recommendation to the commissioners so that they'll vote to advertise the ordinance as we presented it tonight. That's what we really need to keep this moving at this point.
Well, Chairman Bob, maybe I missed a meeting or something, but have we seen this ordinance before?
We saw an earlier version of this ordinance
Okay.
before, and we did already recommend to the Board of Commissioners that they move forward with advertising.
Okay.
Now, we had some conditions in our recommendation, and I would say the conditions are, for the most part, met.
We've now changed the
Yes, yeah.
language to where we believe we've addressed. So the commissioners will be able to look at what your recommendation was, and they'll be able to look at the changes we made after that recommendation. Staff, however, was concerned that with I'm going to call it the two buckets of changes we made this time with respect to, the uses and the residential component, that it was probably significant enough to warrant us coming back here, alerting you to what those were so that you weren't, if we went right to the commissioners and they passed, you weren't surprised when the plan came back in and say, geez, this looks different. What happened to that convenience? What happened to this, the gas user? So the thought was come back here because we'll be moving, knock on wood, to the commissioners on Thursday to get this advertised. Because we'll need this to be passed, hopefully within the time constraints needed to pass an ordinance for the advertisement. It would be advertised. There'd be a public hearing on the ordinance. And then obviously we get moving with the conditional use and the plans in earnest. Because we are working on that, but we still can't really get going at I would say the speed that the Jandals would like until we know that the ordinance is enacted.
Where, Tom, what is different from what we saw before? I mean, I don't remember seeing a facility, an auditorium of this size. And was that there before?
No, some
Okay.
of the uses are the new part of
Okay.
this.
Well, let me pursue a line of question. Again, what leads you to believe there will be a market for a facility of that size in this part of the county?
Well, our conversations with the tenant, they've expressed a lot of interest on the site specifically.
And what kind of uses do you see for that auditorium?
That would be that sports entertainment retail use, the one that would have sports apparel, the one that would be the virtual, the virtual reality and batting and golfing and rock climbing.
I think he's asking about the auditorium.
Yeah, I am, Luke. I'm sorry. I'm asking about the
Okay,
auditorium.
The one they're calling the.
It's the
3,000
Performance Theater.
The Performance Theater.
Performance
I think
Theater is what it's called in the ordinance.
Well, for
He's
private,
asking what type of user.
yeah, for
Okay.
private,
Yeah. What
You're
type of
saying-
user showed that interest
and
for the performance? Yeah, I didn't know if I could say that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Look, I mean, it's not.
I leave it to you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Well,
It's the comedy club. We mentioned it earlier,
Yeah.
the comedy club.
you anticipate the need for 5,000 seats?
The
Potentially.
the ordinance has a maximum of 5,000 seats.
Right.
That-
Yeah,
that's
I'm
what
just
the
trying
ordinance
to understand if there's what the research is that led
Go ahead.
the developers to conclude that that size was necessary.
I will say this, the number that has been proposed is probably larger than you would have thought, no matter what we put in. But you, in further discussions, what number are you at with this, the prospective tenant?
Well, yeah, the specific tenant is one thing, but the opportunity for the other kind of bucket of tenants within that, I mean, if it's, you know, a not to exceed 3,000, I think, you know, that's a number we'd be comfortable with. We don't want to limit us to the other opportunities in the market. I mean, this existing tenant is less than that 5,000, but if that one doesn't come through, you know, we just don't want to have that flexibility going forward with other comparable opportunities.
But the number, the roughly 3,000 was the one with which you had a discussion.
Yep. Yes.
I mean, that's all we
Again-
can- That's what we can say at this point.
Help educate me. What's the basis for reaching that number? What makes you think you can fill that place up with 3,000 people?
That's their need for attendance and their seating arrangement.
Their need, I'm sorry,
So to clarify, there was, that use is based on one specific user that had interest.
okay, and you can't identify that.
Can't identify him. That user is about 3,000. So when we added the use, we gave ourselves a little room because if the next one came along and said, we need 3,025, we'd have to come back here. However, Luke is saying if it needs to be a lower number than that, we have some wiggle room, but the particular user was 3,000. And that's why I said even the number of the actual person will probably surprise you. Because that to me, it was a big number when Luke said it, but that 3,000 was based on reality, not just us saying, give ourselves some wiggle room should another one come along. So,
Well, you know, the concept's really magnificent and I'm all for it, but I like to see the township have an empty building 10 years down the road because we didn't gauge correctly what the market was. And that's
Sure.
why I'm asking.
Yeah, we're on the same page. We don't want an empty building either. Yeah, we find in looking at comparable developments across the country with similar style uses, it's going to breed a lot of activity from office users, office headquarters, higher rent in apartment rentals. It just breeds that. I mean, the ones we've looked at across the country, and we'd be happy to share those, offline.
I think your focus on entertainment uses is a positive thing. I don't know that in the future, we're going to see a need or there's going to be growth in the commercial retail sector. So it's really, I think entertainment is the area where there's going to be growth and the greatest interest.
and can I say that, for example, the experiential one, that's not a concept, that's real, right?
That is correct.
That is that's an existing user out there, so, which has made that decision that that's the type of use you're going to see in the future, the blend of the retail experiential. So again, that's not just someone saying, hey, I have a great idea. It's someone, we had a great idea and it seems to be working and we want to put it here.
Yeah.
So
And I think I'd also say, I'm speaking out of turn, but I think a collection of all these uses at one single location, the opportunity to have that specific use in the Lehigh Valley might be limited just to this opportunity, right?
There's
I
only
mean,
gonna be one of these in the entire
Yeah.
region.
well, in the entire Lehigh Valley, right? I think if we don't assemble all the right pieces at this specific location, the opportunity to have that retail user in the valley might not be here.
Tom, was the prior drafted in terms of the number of units they could build per acre? That changed from what was there and what is now?
I believe it did, but Nate would be the best person to answer that question.
Yes, it did. What we are allowing for now is the calculation based off the gross tract area as opposed to the netted out tract area. So previously, we would require the netting out of natural resource areas or easements. Now by utilizing the gross tract area, this provides the applicant with the number of units that they're saying will make it financially feasible for the smaller streetscape uses to come in, which is really kind of the centerpiece of this project with the two anchors on each end. So the notation for the number of units is based, and we'll be doing our zoning calculation off the gross tract area. That's where the language changes.
Yeah, so essentially what happened was Luke went back and said, okay, we've got certain new uses coming in, but we also have got to start this with that main street, that kind of corridor. And from the discussions you've had with developers who have done these facilities before, this was the number that was suggested to Luke. Now, maybe it won't get quite up to that, but this is what you need to be able to accommodate for putting together something like we've got there, because we still do want to have the ability to accommodate, the retail, the restaurants, that kind of row in the center. And while Topgolf may not need that number alone, it would be a draw unto itself to have this mesh or melding of it. This is what, based on Luke's research, we need to have the flexibility.
Can we talk about specific numbers? Under the original draft of the ordinance, how many apartment units did you have on that plan compared to how many apartment units would be allowed under the new ordinance?
Under the previous plan, it was around 360 units after we netted out all the open space, the commercial area, the purely residential area.
360.
Yeah, use the mic, 'cause some people got hearing aids out there.
All right, so 360 under the old version of the order, prior version of the ordinance.
360 under the old version of the ordinance. And then depending on how we calculate the total mixed use area, there's 45 acres that are going to be part of the mixed use development. 13 is dedicated solely to Topgolf. Based on the 45, that would put us at 550 units. And if we use the entire 58 acres, that puts us just under 700.
So from 360 to 700.
550 to 700.
Okay, I thought your original one, you said it was 360.
Yes, the original was 360.
Nate, help me again, going back to all the work we did on the zoning ordinances. Two things. One, this concept apply to other mixed use projects in the township? Will the same rationale be used?
When you say concept, what do you mean?
Gross acreage versus,
Yes, previously under our other subdivision requirements, we required the netting out of space. However, in this particular case, which is just the HE zone, a mixed use in the HE zone, we recognize the need for the number of units to make the mixed use component work at the level that the applicant's providing. So we're getting a more dense and urban style development, which is essentially what we're trying to achieve with mixed use, especially at infrastructure areas, as Mr. Jandal pointed out, such as this.
And we were very careful in the ordinance to make sure that everything was clarified. It's only mixed use. These ordinances only apply to mixed use development in the HE district. So it wouldn't be opened up township wide to use any of these uses or density or any of the other provisions in this ordinance. It's only for this mixed use. And it requires the town center type of development. It requires a certain number of buildings have to have the retail on the first floor. With the residential above, we have to have that town center, that walkable boulevard, that component is mandatory requirement that has to be part of the project.
Which is not the case in other mixed use, to your point.
Right. In other mixed use developments, you probably more commonly see a residential component and then a separate commercial component with coordinated access points, but not combined on top of each other. It would be almost impossible to separate the two and say, what's the residential area, and then do the calculation because they're on top of each other. The commercial and residential component are tied together.
Nate, again, pardon me, I don't mean to be the naysayer or curmudgeon, but I just need to understand. is there any, in that district, is there any other possibility of the application of this ordinance to another applicant? Or is this solely going to benefit them?
Are you saying mixed use in the HE?
This ordinance, is it going to benefit solely this applicant? Or can someone else benefit from it in this district? Are we getting, I'm asking, are we spot zoning?
I would say we're not spot zoning. We're creating a mixed use in the HE district, which affects every parcel in the HE district.
Is it feasible that another developer could come in realistically and do this, take advantage of this ordinance?
Potentially on a smaller scale.
Okay, so I want to know.
Doesn't the ordinance require 20 acres to do this type of development? I think that's in the ordinance, that there's a 20-acre minimum.
Think I
So
would
you
have
need
to
to-
double check that.
So you need to have 20 acres in the HE zoning district, and there's probably very few properties that are 20 acres in that zoning district.
No, but you could join several of the properties that are in the other area, because please recall, we do have some industrial uses that are off of Cedar Brook Road, where if they chose to sell, they could easily join all those lots and create a 20-acre lot, singular, if they wanted to do something similar. If this moves from being an industrial zone into a more service-oriented mixed-use zone, there's no reason, if there's more money to be made in doing that instead of the existing industrial use that you have there, you could abandon that use and join the properties together.
So someone could build roughly 40% of what we have, right? A 20-acre would be somewhere 50 something,
Hopefully they would just join with ours.
right? But yes, so the answer is yes. But you couldn't do a 3-acre one, just not feasible. Obviously, probably doesn't make sense. I don't know how someone would create the building, the retail apartment buildings in that instance, but yeah, someone else is free to do that as long as they can accumulate 20 acres. But again, it's HE. So I think the point we got from the beginning was don't open this up to every zoning district where mixed use is allowed, because there are zoning districts where mixed use is allowed, that it was our understanding you wouldn't want the type of density that you would in the areas that are zoned HE.
I've been asking questions. I don't want to mislead you. I think the concept's absolutely dynamite, but I've got to say this. I'm concerned, here we are looking at an ordinance with, is going to allow up to 700 and some odd units, up to 3,000 people coming into a particular venue, not to mention the other draws of the site and its impact on our traffic and its impact on stormwater. I'm concerned that we're recommending to the commissioner something that could come back and bite us when we get into the actual land development aspects of this. So I hope, what are your thinking? What's your thinking, Nate and Brian, about that? Are we protecting ourselves?
Well, if you're talking about traffic and other infrastructure, as we always say, that's going to be what restricts or allows a site to develop the level of improvements that are necessary to carry wastewater and traffic. So that is incumbent upon the applicant to be able to manage those items for the infrastructure of a project. And that's not just here, that's anywhere in the township, anywhere in any community.
Well, okay, I'm just asking you as staff, whether you have a concern with this ordinance change, that you're asking for something we can't meet in terms of our infrastructure.
I think we can meet it.
Okay.
Especially with any, required upgrades that would come along with it. I don't see why not, especially given its proximity to the interchange on 78.
Brian, do you agree?
Well, I just want to say, one, we didn't evaluate any of that. Two, the traffic ordinance, it didn't change. Stormwater ordinance didn't change. They're going to be required to meet all those requirements with the land development process, so we can evaluate all of that sort of things as that process comes along. As Nate said, if you can't, those will be the restrictions. You won't be able to, you'll be limited to your impervious, you'll be limited to the stormwater volumes you can control, and will be consistent with the ordinance as written. Those ordinance sections are not changing.
Thank you. Thank you all for bearing with me, my questions.
And just to add that we have all those concerns in mind. We will take care of all those items. The ordinance, as we've written it, is basically the menu of all the things that we could possibly do. We know that we can't order more than we can handle.
I
So
hope so. That's
the-
true.
the traffic, the
For your sake and
stormwater,
ours
the
as well.
the wastewater disposal, all of those constraints will play into what actually goes onto the conditional use plan and the land development plans. This is basically giving us the flexibility to put those items in place if we've got a user lined up.
700 residential units, it's a lot of units. And maybe you give us a little bit more detail as to why it's critical that you need that number of units.
I guess that's a question for me. Yeah, I think as we've gone through this process since the Topgolf iteration, I think the initial interest on the residential side was a complimentary. As we've navigated through the success of larger mixed-use developments, the need for more density is critical, and the success of the retail on property, right, is directly related to the amount of density you have on the site. So you can imagine if you've got a coffee shop on the first floor every day, that's going to be your morning routine if you live on site. So, I mean, we found that with the developers we've chatted with and the retailers we've communicated with, the push for more density for success for everybody is where it needs to be and is what is currently proposed.
I think you could be honest with you, say, if you just were coming in and doing a Topgolf at a separate, you wouldn't necessarily need it. Topgolf is a different animal. Topgolf as part of the mixed use is what's driving, trying to get the critical mass for that,
Yep.
correct?
Exactly. And I think also to note the success long-term of the first floor retail will be dependent in not a large part, but a good percentage of the residents on property. So in 30 years from now, we want to make sure that the coffee shop is still there, right? I mean, and the support will be from on premise.
All right, any other comments or questions from the planning commission? We will open it up for public comment. Mari, you wanna come up to the microphone.
Just would like to, okay, so my main concern is the trafficking on the intersection of Cedar Brook Road and the bypass. And, okay, so 705 dwelling units would result in about 800 PM trips. And then a 5,000 seat auditorium with what, 2,500 cars coming in and going out at specific scheduled times would also present a major issue associated with traffic. So that would be my biggest concern.
Mari, what would you do about that? What could you do about it?
Okay, so, well, one question is for a 400-foot long, 6-story building, how many apartments would be in each building?
Depending on the configuration of the building, it could vary. It could be 170, 150. You know, that number could change.
Do you have the number of units? I can't see from where I'm sitting, or
Yeah,
the
how
number
many
of units
buildings do you
marked
show
on your
there?
plan?
Shows 85, 85, 80, 50, 55, 65. Those are all just approximate, like Luke said, depending on the configuration of the units, are they 2-bedroom or 4 or 5? Those numbers could change.
And so
drastically.
the total of that's what, 360,
This one, 550.
550?
That's some on the north side of the river.
So that's okay, so that's figuring on basically using the total acreage of lot 1, right? To come up with 550.
550 was actually what we could fit in at the moment. The ordinance, like I said, the menu allows you to order up to 7.
Okay, and
we
well, it
reconfigure-
actually works out that if you take the acreage of lot 1 and multiply it by 12, you end up with 546. Is that an acceptable number? 550.
Yeah, I think it's if this is more of a community project, I think we want to look at what's best for the community. Obviously, the traffic is a hot button item for everybody, and we get that. We need to ensure that the access onto the property is convenient for everybody in there. So if it's a bad experience, it's gonna detriment the property as a whole.
Let me try it, because I respect what Maury's saying, and 550 may be what we end up with. I think what we have to do is, the stage we're in right now is looking for your recommendation for what's proposed. Go to the BOC so we can advertise. But we have so much work to do, and we want to put the best possible uses into the plan that we have. We know the plan, we know the footprint, which John had over there to show you with the elevations. That's what, between the township and Jandal, that's what we're going to do. But we want to put the best uses in. And what we're trying to do is just make sure all those options are there to us so we can provide the best uses for this project. And on top of that, I think as Maury was alluding to on the traffic, we've already had some scoping discussions with PennDOT. We've met with them, and we recognize, and one of the reasons why you don't see the gas in there, it's the most practical, as far as I'm concerned, value-wise, for the acreage that are being used. But that's not how we're looking at it. We're looking at, for those acres that Wawa would occupy, what are the traffic trips? And so we looked at that, and we felt that for the betterment of the project, that maybe eliminating that use and that amount of traffic would make the most sense. So it's still so very premature. And but to try to answer Maury's question, I think we could have some flexibility on the overall number. I'd like it to be a little higher than 550. Do I think it's going to be 550 or less? I do, but I'd like the ability to go a little higher, because we haven't really, we don't have a final plan yet in front of you.
What are you thinking about, David?
I'm thinking about 695. I'm kidding. What I'm thinking is on a gross unit basis, we can certainly drop that to 10.5 to 11. We could, if you're looking for, as Maury suggested, not to exceed number, leave it at the number that we're talking about, 12. And what we'll do is we can cap that, instead of just under 700 where it's at now. We could cap it at, and we didn't talk about this beforehand, but we can certainly cap it at 625.
Okay, thank you.
And what I would say by saying that is, we'd be looking for a positive recommendation here tonight, and then we'd do a little bit more research between now and Thursday, and we'd further define that when we get in front of the BOC. All right.
And okay, as far as the 5,000 seat auditorium, that'd be less than 75,000 square feet.
Yeah, yes, you could say that. Yes.
Okay. And I assume it would have its own parking deck?
Yes.
Okay. How many parking garages are proposed at this point?
There are 2 shown in the plan at this point. Again, it depends on the combination of uses that we ultimately.
Yeah, it's one for the apartments, right?
Combined.
Yeah.
There are 2, they serve the apartments and the retail. It's all combined
Yeah.
and walkable. Hopefully the apartments would have reserved spaces undercover.
Okay. Okay, just minor question. On page 5, the full cutoff lights shall not be required, but for the driving range, but the remaining standards and specifications will be. Now, this, the remaining standards, if I remember correctly, the light heat index is set at 3,000, right? And is that going to be acceptable to Topgolf?
We did put the ordinance in front of Topgolf and they've confirmed that all these provisions.
Okay, they did look at all the light provision. Okay.
And we can confirm if there's something specific before Thursday, if you'd like us to look at that.
Okay, well,
Light heat
I
index.
believe it's,
Brian, you happen to have the number? The section number that would be helpful.
Is it, the 27,1805? Is that the one?
We referenced 27, 1805, 6.
Yeah, so I guess my question is more, is it in that section?
I-
We say, okay, because
I haven't memorized the
Okay.
complete ordinance.
I just wanted to make sure I was looking at the right provision.
Okay. And wanted to confirm that the 50% advertising would follow the two-minute change interval that is in our ordinance.
Reiterate that, Mari, what did you just ask?
Huh?
What did you just ask?
Okay, for digital signs, they
Okay,
can only change once every 2 minutes,
all right, gotcha.
so that there's not flashing and, annoying the drivers and so forth. And just wanted to confirm that that was what was intended.
That is the intent.
Huh?
That is the intent. I think the digital electronic sign provisions in the ordinance apply to any digital sign.
Any
I
digital
believe
sign
you're
in any
covering-
zoning district would have to follow those rules.
Yeah,
So, yeah, just trying to clarify.
yeah, this doesn't relieve us from complying with that part.
Right.
We didn't read it that way.
Okay, so those are the only clarifying questions I had. Thanks.
Thank you, Mari. Anyone else from the public that would wish to comment or ask a question? Yeah, Mari, or Rudy has a question.
Just a quick comment. As far as traffic goes, rush hour is our biggest, thing with traffic around here. And that's always going to be, and it's only going to get worse, things grow. But as far as the entertainment center and all that kind of stuff, just like the PPL center downtown or the Iron Pigs, it's kind of, after hours. It's later at night. And when you get out of those things, there really isn't a traffic problem. They said, the PPL center was going to cause, nightmares. Well, it really hasn't, because it's later. I mean, right at the venue, sure, when you're going in and out, it's a little bit, but, that's short-lived and seems to work fine. But that was my only comment about that.
That's a good point.
So Tom, what are we recommending? Being asked to recommend?
Well, I think we can go one of two ways. We already did make a recommendation on this ordinance, although it wasn't exactly the ordinance that's before us tonight. So I don't know that we really need to do anything. We can let our prior recommendation stand and make no recommendation. Or we can make a recommendation since the ordinance has been revised. I don't think it's significantly revised, considering what we asked them to change last time they were before us. I think they did what we asked them to do. Yes, there are a few other uses that they've added. I get that. But I think it's essentially the same. So I don't know that we need to do anything tonight because I think our prior recommendation probably still stands. But if we want to be more comfortable in terms of the ordinance that's before us tonight and making sure that everyone's on board with the current ordinance, we could do another recommendation tonight that I think our recommendation would be something like this, a recommendation of the Board of Commissioners recommending that they authorize advertisement of the proposed ordinance relating to mixed use developments in the HE zone.
So you don't want to mention anything along the line with Mr. Jandal just mentioned in terms of, but what he could live with in terms of number of units?
I think that's probably an issue that's better left to the Board of.
Well, I'm just saying, do we want them to know that that's one of the things that we ask?
I think Maury will definitely take that back to the Board of Commissioners.
All right,
So I don't know that we need to get into that level of detail.
Okay.
because It's going to go to the Board of Commissioners, I believe, Thursday night. I'm sure that'll be a topic of discussion. And it's probably something, the density, I think, is really something the Board of Commissioners should decide.
I bow to your wisdom, sir.
So I think the issue tonight is do we let our prior recommendation stand? Or do we want to make a new recommendation, considering that the ordinance before us is slightly different from the one that we saw a couple weeks back?
Do you have a preference?
In all candor, I think irrespective of which way you go, we're going to the commissioners on this on Thursday, and they're gonna have your comments. I think it would be nice if it was, we recommend it as presented tonight. That would be great, because it would acknowledge we did address your comments from before also.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Tom, I agree with that. Much as I respect you, I think the changes that you've told me about, since more than just slight. Okay? Just for the record.
That's fair. That's fair, Bob.
Everything's de minimis.
Yeah, yeah, well,
Everything I do, I
yeah,
always.
yeah, you attorneys.
minimis.
I don't know.
I'd be comfortable making a motion to move this forward with the new ordinance as proposed.
I'll second.
All right, so we've got a motion to move the proposed ordinance forward. We have a second. Is there any additional comment? Comment from the public. We'll open comment to the public one more time. All right, we'll move to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The recommendation passes by a vote of 4-0.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
David?
All right, next item on the agenda is Macungie Crossings Home Depot Condo Unit Number 2. And Nate, if you want to review the planning issues with us?
Happy to. I'm also going to get up the screen share for you all here.
And Nate, you want to state we've got a different person sitting in?
Yes,
council?
yes, we do have a conflict solicitor sitting in with us, Attorney John Ashcraft. John, you want to introduce yourself to the group here? But we do have someone standing in for this particular project.
That's because your regular solicitor had the conflict, so I'm here. It's been a number of years. And so it's almost like doing something for the first time again.
Everybody's face is different. Right?
Yep.
All right, as I share the screen here, we've had several meetings with these folks. All have been very fruitful. As you recall, the last time the plan was before us, we had discussion points with respect to technical items that I will leave to our township engineer to discuss in greater detail from a planning perspective. We have worked at great lengths with the applicant to ensure that the proposal meets our design guidelines for the township as well as our plan concepts for the Hamilton Boulevard corridor. What you can see on the screen right now is the renewed facade and building treatment for this proposed retail and service center. At the very bottom here would be the front. Changes that have occurred include inclusion of parapets instead of pitched roofs. We have awnings on the front. This would be the actual front entrances and vertical elements. Then it moves to the sides where we have similar treatments throughout the structure. And then ensuring, because the rear of the structure is going to face Hamilton Boulevard, we really wanted to work with the applicant to make sure that we got that double frontage so that we continue to have that storefront look on Hamilton Boulevard, which this rendering right here shows perfectly. So you'll see the emergency access doors and faux windows basically acting as storefronts with that signage, with those awnings the same way. That with the inclusion of the patio for the potential food user, which here on the side, you can see a potential door entrance for patrons to go out for outdoor dining, if that's what that ends up being. Basically creates what we've been trying to achieve for all of our centers along these line items that are coming in on Hamilton Boulevard, which creates that lively streetscape. Hopefully we'll see people eating out there like we do at Notch, and at, Shepherd's Corner. I should note, just for a couple of cleanup items, there are some fairly large utility easements that separate the structure from the street, so we couldn't move it all the way up, but that's because we have utilities moving through there and grading. But this will be visible from Hamilton Boulevard. We've already discussed with the applicant, there's some shrubs that could be removed, no problem, to create greater visibility. We're going to work with the applicants to make sure that the facade on the retaining wall for the patio is right-minded, since that's going to be right in the visible range anywhere. But again, I think after a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth, we now have another service center that will be able to put a feather in the cap of the township as something that is right in line with what we're trying to do on Hamilton as we move right down the road with some of these developments. So I'm satisfied, and staff is ready to recommend approval of it from a planning perspective. And I do want to allow Brian to bring up any final technical comments for the site to make sure that we have those items addressed as well.
All right, thank you, Nate. Just want to note that our last conversation, we were concerned about planned presentation issues. The majority of our concerns were relative to that. We've had discussions with your engineer's office. We went back and forth, looked at the notice intent, plan notes and details, and have ensured that kind of all the notes and details are now updated to meet the current ordinance standards. So we are satisfied with the red line changes that you guys are going to make, and expect that the next plan revision will be up to date for those current standards. Thank you.
Attorney Durso, just so we have everybody's name for the record, if you could just introduce your team.
Sure. Kate Durso from Fitzpatrick, Lentz and Buva, Bud Newton, obviously, who you all know, and John Karakis from Greenberg Farrow.
Thank you. Any particular issues you'd like to bring to the Planning Commission's attention?
I would like to thank Brian and Brian for, if you remember last meeting, there was some confusion of how do we report what was done with the Home Depot part of the project and what we're doing with these new components of the project. And we worked very closely with Brian and we were able to get that resolved right after the last Planning Commission meeting. And there is one item that is in the traffic engineer's letter that in regard to some of the future ADA ramps on the out parcel and crossings of the main driveway on the lot one. We did not ask for waivers of those because we're not dealing with those out parcels in lot one at this point in time. They'll be addressed when we submit the plans for those lots. And other than that, the only waiver we're asking for is that this be considered as a preliminary final plan.
I know last time you were before us, there was some confusion over references to old zoning sections in the plan. Have those issues been resolved?
Yeah, that's the notes that Brian was just
Okay.
referencing.
Yes. And I'm guessing you had a chance to see the sample motion.
Yes, we don't have any issues with the sample motion. We just think it might need to add the waiver.
The one waiver request,
Yes.
that request being to be considered as a preliminary final plan.
Correct. And we're hopeful that you appreciate the renderings and the new elevations. So we knew that was an issue last time.
Are we ready for Mr. Hammer?
Is it hammer time?
All right.
Still need public.
Yeah, we'll get public comment. We'll open up for public comment at this time. All right, we'll entertain a motion, and just so we all understand that it'll be the sample motion as well as additional waiver approval of a recommendation for approval of a waiver so that the plan can be considered as a preliminary final plan. We have to add that one thing to the draft motion.
My apologies on that oversight.
All right, I will make a motion. Motion to recommend approval of the Home Depot Condo Unit 2 plan upon the following conditions. First, the applicant shall address all comments in the most recent Township Planning Department, zoning officer, and Township Engineer review letters to the written satisfaction of each. Second, the applicant shall construct the proposed building in conformity with the elevation shown to the Planning Commission at their February 14, 2023 regular meeting. Number three, the applicant shall construct the proposed building with the exterior patio and fencing as shown to the Planning Commission, again at the February 14, 2023 regular meeting. Fourth, the proposed retaining wall shall have a facade to be reviewed and approved to the written satisfaction of the Township Planning Department. Fifth, the applicant shall install a monument sign at the paved entrance of the lot as depicted on the plan and with a design meeting the written satisfaction of the Township Planning Department. And six, that the waiver would be approved, allowing this to be a preliminary final plan. And Mr. Chairman, that is the motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rust. Any further comments? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Motion passes by a vote of 4-0. Thank you.
And just that he does.
All right, up next is the Valley at Indian Creek, 3510 Macungie Road preliminary final subdivision plan. Nate, if you can take us through the planning issues.
Sure thing. So what you're looking at here is the plan that actually should not be all that unfamiliar with the group. As everybody recalls, we had several iterations and some long discussions with respect to this proposed subdivision off of Macungie Road at the intersection of Macungie and Indian Creek. The applicants did receive zoning relief to be able to put in the single-family residential dwellings on a loop road, as we can see here coming off of Macungie Road. There's going to be 22 dwellings. The road system, as you can see here, is a little tight, but we have looked at it as far as from the design perspective. We'll continue to make sure that it handles our larger vehicles, both for the municipal side as well as for garbage pickup. One thing that I should note is there's a fair amount of open space that is proposed as part of this project. Over here, we have open space at the northerly end of the site. It looks like it's eastern, but that's actually the northern delineation, and at the southerly portion of the site. There are a couple of easements for stormwater in between the lots, as you can see here, and there is a walking trail that is proposed that will tie into the abutting park. From my perspective, we have a couple of items that we just want to continue to make sure are on everybody's radar. They are not too far out of the zone of prior discussions with the applicants. We continue to recommend the street trees, given the size of the street and the sidewalks and the size of the front yards. And then the strip that would be in between, it would be better to have the street trees on the lawn side as opposed to in between the sidewalk and the curb. Just given how close everything is in this development, we want those trees to have a chance to thrive and get as large as they can without causing infrastructure issues. So in this particular circumstance, on the backside of the sidewalk would actually be best. We're encouraging the applicant to put in front porches as always. They're allowed to go into the front yard setback so that they can have those front porches. Lots 2 through 3 do have a trail that abuts the rear. It would be good to get some sort of a fence in between there so that people don't randomly walk into other people's backyards. So that's a quick and easy fix there. We do recommend also making sure that there are no conflicts between street trees and any stop signs or other signs. Also, it's been recommended that we, instead of just the 2 street lights, we possibly consider a couple more in there, again, without conflicts from the street trees. But I think the biggest and most important thing that we do want to discuss here is the management of the stormwater basin and how we are going to do that moving forward. we don't object to the system that is potentially set up at all. We just need to figure out how we are going to do it in terms of agreements and the legality of the nature of the fact that we're going to have an extended stormwater basin that comes onto Township Park property that is also included on the lot that a 22 unit HOA is going to be managing as well. So we do want to figure that out. Last but not least, I would like to thank the applicants and provide commendation. I mean, the landscaping plan is great. So I'm no RLA, but it's a very good plan. And I think having some of the privacy buffers for lots 14 through 22 at the rear is a very, very positive thing, given the fact that they're going to have reverse frontage on such a busy road. And I apologize. The only other point that I do want to bring up is we do have several of these lots, and we've brought this up before, but roughly lots 4 through 11, they're going to have very limited backyards. And some of them have conveyance swales for stormwater. So there's going to come a time when the applicants, or I'm sorry, but the owners of those homes do come to us and they ask to put in something. We do have a disclosure ordinance. We just want to make it clear, you build a deck over it, you're doing it at your own risk because there's a swale that's there. And you might not have enough room to put in a pool or a shed or a patio. And just so long as people are aware of that, because that's an important note when you look at the size and scale of these lots. But beyond that, given the zoning relief that's been granted and the shape and size of the lot, I think we're now at a point where the product is about as good as it's going to get. And we thank the applicant for all the help and assistance in getting it forward to this point. With that, I would hand it over to Brian to talk to all the technical aspects. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about stormwater.
Of course, of course. All right, well, thank you, Nate. I just want to start off by saying you guys have addressed a lot of our concerns. I mean, for instance, the walking trail that goes through the open space over to Jasper Lane on top of the sewer easement. And that kind of removing the sidewalk and the frontage improvements along, in coordination with moving those frontage improvements along Indian Creek Road. I think that makes a lot of sense. Some of our concerns still are around the basin design. One of them being how the easements are identified on the plan and kind of I know we've discussed at these planning commission meetings, the expectation the homeowners association is going to take ownership of the maintenance. Well, not ownership. I think that's some of the confusion that the township is going to, or the intent was the township is going to maintain ownership of basin on the township's property, but then provide an easement to the HOA on the township's property. And the HOA was intended to maintain the basin. There's also some notes about dedication of the streets and right of way that really just need to be clarified. I think that some of those notes on the plan, there's some that are different in different places. And that stuff really needs to be ironed out and very, very clear so that when we get to developing and somebody's actually building this, we don't have issues with, oh, well, the plan note says is confusion. So some of this certainly needs to be ironed out. With the basin, the design is also much better. You guys have addressed some of the offsite areas and the routing so that you're actually accounting for all the areas appropriately, which is just great. And that looks good. We do still have a question about the existing bottom of basin and really surveying that appropriately and accounting for that existing, how the existing basin functions relative to the existing flow leaving the site. So those are some of our concerns. I'd also like to kind of take a minute to go through some of the waiver requests that you guys have here. I think that would certainly be pertinent. We discussed not doing the frontage improvements along Indian Creek Road, but that you guys are doing frontage improvements along the entirety of Cungy Road. We'd certainly like to see the Cungy Road tapers down before you get to the intersection. We'd certainly like to see that widening go all the way through into the intersection so that it's not tapering down right before you're stopping and making a turn. But we are okay with the recommendation for not doing widening and improvements on Indian Creek because of the walking path and other amenities that you guys are providing. The horizontal curves within development being less than 200 feet. Again, that was the radius within internal development. They needed the room to put the houses. And we were okay with them shrinking those radiuses down so that this layout accompanies this lane. The intersection separation, so Macungie Road and Indian Creek Road, the township ordinance requires that you have a 400-foot separation to the nearest intersection. So where your new road comes in, ties into Macungie Road, is less than that 400 feet. After looking at it closely from a traffic perspective, because you only have 22 houses, the queuing that would be needed on Macungie Road, we looked at the volume of traffic going into that intersection, well, site distance, determined that in this specific case, and especially because Macungie Road and Indian Creek is a T intersection, and there's a relatively low number of units entering this development, as well as there's 2 entrances to this development, that there's not a safety impact with cars basically waiting to turn left to get in and being backed up, and there's not a site distance issue. So we actually don't have an issue with recommending that waiver request. And then the waiver request for 6. So we're just looking so that you guys identify the rest of the trees on the sites that are 6 inches or more in diameter. And then the final requirement is the street trees, which Nate actually had brought up, that we'd actually prefer that you locate those behind the sidewalk. Thank you. I know that was a lot.
Thanks. Attorney Schock, if you just want to introduce
Sure.
your team, so we have everyone's name for the record.
Yep, Eric Schock from Patrick Munson, Buba, attorney on the project. Ben Barlin is the engineer, and then with me is Reese Rosenthal, Lake France, who are the developers. And as Mr. Jones said, probably familiar faces on this project. We've been here a few times. I don't know that there's any other introduction necessary of this with this, because you've seen it, I think, enough times, but we do have some of the items that were already mentioned by your engineer and Mr. Jones that we'd like to talk about, and then a few other comments in the letter we'd like to talk about, just to kind of, what I'll say, for the most part is we're fine with the comments. There's just some things we need to straighten out, get some direction on, so we can, knock on wood, finally wrap this up. So, get started.
Sure. So I guess the best place to start would probably be on the waiver requests, because Brian already brought those up. Starting, I guess, with A, 4A, in the CKS letter on page 2, regarding the road widening waiver. So we have widened Macungie Road to the far northern end of our site and tapering it back into the existing curb line, or the existing shoulder. I guess there's no curb on Macungie Road currently. And then all through the site, and then as Brian mentioned, we do taper it back in before the Indian Creek Road intersection. And one of the reasons that we're doing that is we are a little worried. We've had experiences with PennDOT where we're widen an intersection leg, where it is possible that you could get 2 cars next to each other. And here with 19 feet, you're probably on the border of that, the smaller end, where PennDOT doesn't really like that position from a safety standpoint, because what happens is, someone's waiting at the intersection to turn left off Macungie Road, and then someone in a larger vehicle potentially comes up on the right, wants to turn right, and they end up next to each other, and neither. So that's sort of a case that we're looking to avoid by tapering down early.
Do you know if that's PennDOT's specific request for this intersection? Have you checked with
We do
PennDOT?
not know that.
Can you
for-
verify that?
We can.
I think it would be a stronger argument that for the waiver, if we had something from PennDOT that said, this is what we want.
Sure, we can do that. And then in the case that PennDOT doesn't have an issue, we would go ahead, widen the radius on that intersection. Indian Creek Road. The next one was, I guess, waiver D on page 3, related to replacement trees. So we are currently providing as many replacement trees as we are able. There is one area that was mentioned in the CKS letter where we might need to take a closer look, and that's to the eastern end or the western end of the basin where the sewer and the walking trail go to connect. However, for what we have on the site, we've tabulated all the 6-inch or larger trees. And looking at replacement trees for those, we are required to plant 50 replacement trees. We currently have 18 or 12. We have 12, I'm sorry. We currently have 12 replacement trees, which means that we're 38 trees short of the requirement. So we requested a waiver for this because we don't really have anywhere on the site to plant them that is a common space that's not within a site triangle or an easement or basin. The landscaping plan should be toward the front. We're looking forward on.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up. It takes a while for it to go down.
Yeah.
It's the last one. There we go.
So this is our landscaping plan. We have the site triangles near the roads and the intersections. We've planted along the sewer easement, between the sewer easement and Indian Creek Road. And then there's the gas easement that runs sort of through the middle of the site between the basin and units 1 through 3. So we don't really have anywhere appropriate to put these trees in a common space on our property. And the reason we wanted to bring that up is because the CKS letter mentioned that it might be a situation where a variance would be required. So we're looking to comply with the zoning ordinance to the maximum extent possible. I'm not sure from a legal perspective whether or not a fee in lieu of those trees would relieve that concern. Or if not, potentially we could plant them on the lots themselves to the maximum extent possible to satisfy the replacement tree requirement.
Another option that we could look at here is instead of substitution of large specimen trees would be smaller specimen shrubs that would get to a medium size, potentially on some of the common space or in or along the basin, something like an elderberry or certain willow varieties. I mean, we could gladly trade off for that if we wish. Given the size constraints for the lot, I don't think you can fit that many large specimen trees on there, given when they get to full growth, how big they're going to be. It's a pretty tight space. So the planning commission could just advise that they work with township engineer, landscape architect, myself, and come up with some solutions for maybe some shrubs or mid-sized things that could go in some of these continued open space areas around the basin or elsewhere that would satisfy that requirement.
Nate, are there any other township-owned properties where there's a need to plant trees?
Well, we're always looking for planting trees and shrubs in the riparian buffer areas along all the creek everywhere in the township. So if you're interested in doing that, I think swamp white oaks and likewise down by the creek would always be well appreciated. We do the small whips with our partnership with the Wildlands Conservancy, but if we have the opportunity to get like a 3-inch caliper in there or a bunch of those, that starts that along much earlier. And we are trying to really continue to improve that area, given that it's trout habitat for so many fishers and that it gets stocked. Covering up the creek from sunlight's pretty important. So that's an option.
I can echo that your environmental advisory committees, you're very interested in that kind of thing, Tom.
We could help with your MS4 requirements as well, 38
Yeah,
trees.
right.
So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, if it's okay, I guess we would say, why don't we just make those suggestions part of the discussion with the engineer, Mr. Jones?
Yeah, I think you just
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
through Nate and figure out where the trees are going to go.
Okay.
Do we, and please excuse my ignorance because I didn't give it that much of a look in the most recent, your MS4, not your MS4, your stormwater management requirements for water quality. What's the intent there? Because I didn't see a spray irrigation area.
No, for water quality, we're satisfying all of that with the basin itself.
Okay. I was just curious if you were looking to do irrigation or not.
No, we're not proposing irrigation.
Okay.
Nate, have you gotten into any discussion with the applicant as to the type of replacement trees?
That's, I think, something what we can discuss. We'll figure that out because the list is changing pretty constantly on what's being infected, what bugs are getting what. I did notice that there were some blue spruces on here, and I just know from ones that we have here on the campus and township parks that a couple of years ago, they got hit by a fungus. You don't want to do that again. So we'll work with the RLA and we'll figure that out.
Eric,
Offline.
I'm sure,
Already a comment on one particular type of letter already.
Yep.
Which is fine.
We'll figure it out.
Eric, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but it's to the benefit of the applicant as well as the township that you have the right kind of tree.
For sure. The next item was related more broadly to streetlights. So we've currently proposed one streetlight at each of the intersections of the Loop Road. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. So for streetlights, we have proposed one streetlight at each of the intersection points between the Loop Road and Macungie Road. The letter is seeking, I presume, further streetlights and a streetlight district for the development. And we just wanted to get some clarity on that, what that would involve.
Yeah.
what the township will be looking for.
So the streetlight district is just a fancy term for making sure that we get on PPL's radar, because what's going to happen is the lights and the setup of how they're going to get billed to the HOA and whatnot all have to go through PPL. So that's the creation of the streetlight district. It's just an application that gets filed for, you know, everybody's edification here in the audience and those watching from home. We have some older neighborhoods that never had streetlights installed, and the applicants come together, or the residents come together and ask, and they create a streetlight district. What we're doing now with every new subdivision is saving that process into the future, and we just create that district to begin with for every new subdivision. Well, I commend, and we're happy having them at the intersection. It was brought up in staff that some staff meetings that, you know, maybe 2 or 3 more throughout that road would be advisable. And that's just to provide lighting. I guess the only other question that I would have is unless, are there individual light posts proposed for each one of these homes? I mean, sometimes people do that, but if it's not, I would say go with the street light. Yeah.
I think probably more in.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah, we would do
you'd be
2 or
good with
3
2
and meet
or
the
3 more
requirements
and you
for
should be
local
okay.
road.
Yep.
Okay.
And then again, as I noted before, just because we see it now 10, 15, 20 years later, we want to make sure that there's adequate separation between the street light and the street tree. Tree goes in, it's small, it gets big, and then we're gonna start having to cut down branches because of where the signs and the lamp posts are located.
That sounds like another issue you can work with staff on, figure out how many and where the street lights should go.
Sure. Right. So one of the other things in the letter more broadly was active versus passive recreation space. As you can see on the plan, we have a great deal of open space on the site. At a previous meeting, we talked about leaving it as passive open space because the basin's there. It doesn't really have, you know, the qualities that you would want for a sports field or something like that. So we had proposed doing everything as dedicating passive open space and then doing a fee in lieu of active. And we wanted to make sure that the township was still happy with that, or if, you know, some being active would be preferable on this site.
And I think we offered making some improvements active wise on the adjacent park. One or two. Well, one of those 2 alternatives, correct?
Sure, yeah, we could do that as well.
We just wanted direction. Because we did think that it was discussed and everyone seemed comfortable with it just being the passive on ours, but we understand we need to accommodate the other part of it. And I think either option is okay with us.
I guess my opinion is you have a park right behind your development. So to put more active recreation on those 2 recreation areas on both of the wings of your development, I don't know that makes a whole lot of sense.
Right, that was our thought process. We've got the path connecting to the park and we just direction on
So you would, I think,
We'll just work it out again as to whether it be.
Right, but you'll get credit for the passive recreation and the active, you're going to pay a fee in lieu of. Is that what you're
That'll be our
proposing?
initial-
yeah, it would be our regular fee in lieu of. So I think we can come up with some sort of consideration that there will be the passive space here. And I think further, plantings and naturalization in that area would work towards that. And then with the park right next door, that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. So, and then the base. And I think this was brought up that there was some conflicts throughout the plan. There will be an HOA. And the thought was the HOA would be the party maintaining the base. I don't believe, speaking with Mr. Bruman, that there's the ability, for example, to swap land for us to pay. So I think the conclusion was that there would be an easement granted to this property for access and maintenance of the basin portion that's on township property. And the HOA would have to be formed immediately as part of that, in connection with reporting of the plan, so that we can memorialize that requirement and obligation on the HOA.
And if we're going to consider that, one of the things that I was thinking about is do we want to consider on the township side, then potentially subdividing off this basin area so it's separate from the rest of the park, so that the easement only applies to the subdivision with respect to the basin and not the rest of the parcel. Now, granted, we would need to go through the process ourselves, but it would make it cleaner to have that as a separate lot than it would have it as an access easement for basin on an entirely large township parcel for the park.
My concern is I'm not sure that you only have 23, 22 homes in this development. I'm not sure that's a viable homeowners association. So wouldn't it be better if you donated the open space on the south side of the project that's adjoining the parkland, dedicated that to the township? The township assumed responsibility for that property and the entire basin. And then you paid a perpetual maintenance fee, so the township could use those funds to reimburse itself for the costs of the ongoing maintenance of the basin. Wouldn't that seem to make more sense than to come up with this crazy thing with easements and who's responsible for which half of the basin, and relying on a very small homeowners association, 22 lots, to take care of this into the future?
Makes a lot of sense. Mr. Bile?
Are we dedicating the road then too?
Well, I mean, this is an issue I think you ultimately need to take to the Board of Commissioners, because it's outside of what the Planning Commission really can provide direction on. My personal opinion is we should take the road. Again, for the exact same reasons. I don't believe that a homeowners association is going to be viable for the long term that only has 22 homes in it. I think we're asking for trouble. So in my opinion, the township should take care of the road. The township should take care of the basin. But you guys should pay a perpetual maintenance fee to make sure that the township has the funds to reimburse us for the costs of the ongoing maintenance of the basin.
All right, we'll take that.
I guess my other question is, the stormwater that enters the current basin at the township park, where is that stormwater coming from?
So there are, I suppose you'd say, three areas that we're looking at. One area comes from the homes to the west of the property. That area generally drains down through the park to the existing basin. The other area would be our site itself, some of which comes to the existing basin today, and some I believe may sheet flow somewhere else. I believe most, if not most of it, goes to the basin. And then there's also a cross pipe on Macungie Road that comes from the eastern side across to our side that has a huge drainage area of farm field. And then some of that gets into the basin as well.
And I guess where I'm going with that question
Mhm.
is, if, let's say, the homeowners association ultimately winds up, I know this isn't what I'm suggesting, but let's just play it out. The homeowners association is responsible for maintaining the basin. They don't do a good job. They fail in their responsibilities to maintain the basin. Where is the stormwater problem going to materialize?
It would materialize on the parcel to the west, which I believe is also owned by the township. There's a large low-lying area that would take the impact. I don't believe there's any homes that would be directly affected. However, of course, it's a situation that you would want to avoid.
I'll pull up the map for us so we can all see the overall area here.
So the stormwater problem doesn't materialize in your development, it materializes in somebody else's.
No, so the, right where the mouse is, just to the right of that, Nate, there's a. Oh, is it your?
Mylan.
Yeah, so right there, just to the north of Jasper Road, that grass area is very low lying. And that's where there would be ponding if the stormwater basin were to fail.
Looks like it's pretty close also to Jasper.
There's that low-lying land right in here,
Right,
street view. All of this,
correct.
big willow tree. That's an indication.
May want to throw this out there. The applicant's not changing the location of the emergency spillway from the existing basin. They're utilizing that same location. So where the existing basin would fail, they're just expanding that basin and using that same existing emergency spillway location. They've expanded and are kind of cleaning up the spillway, but same location as the existing township.
That's right. And we're happy to do, we're happy to either dedicate the basin to the township. If you believe that the township would do a better job on maintenance as opposed to an HOA, or we can go the HOA route, we're happy to do whichever is best for everyone.
The street trees, I know there's a discussion about the street trees going behind, I guess, between the curb and the house. Would the street trees be out of the right of way, or would they still be in the right of way of the road?
Currently on the loop road, the new road that we're creating, we have the street trees behind the sidewalk already. So it would be the curb and then a grass strip, then the sidewalk, and then the street trees. And those would still be within the right of way.
They would still be within the right of way.
The ones along Macungie Road, we currently show in that grass strip, and we would move those out to comply with the comments.
And the trail is, I believe, proposed over the sewer line easement.
Right, there's a trail over the sewer line easement, subject to approval by the sewer department. And there's also a trail that connects behind lots 1 through 3 that goes to the park.
Do we know if the sewer department is okay with the trail on their easement?
We have had a few preliminary discussions with them. They haven't mentioned it as a problem. But they do have to do a full plan review, which is forthcoming.
Your plan shows in the hatched areas that's areas designated as open space. And part of the hatch areas includes the expanded stormwater basin. Are you proposing to have expanded stormwater basin count as open space?
I believe that the ordinance allows for stormwater management to be included as passive open space.
We'll have to take a look at that, especially if this basin is going to remain wet. I'm not sure we should be counting the wet basin as open space. So I'd ask you to work with the staff on that to make sure that we really can count the basin area as open space.
Sure, we can review that.
Are there any comments or questions from the planning commission at this point?
No, I just would echo that, what your suggestion in terms of the trees being allotted to other areas within the township where we need them. I think it's a good thing. And I just say, I commend the applicant. I know this has been hard. You've been working a long time on this. It sounds like you're getting close.
All right, we'll open it up to the public. Any comments or questions from the public? Mari?
I agree with you, Tom, associated with the street, that it probably should be a public street because it would be too expensive for the homeowners association. Mark, I would like to understand why we can't sell the detention pond to the homeowners association.
I think it was a bidding issue. It could
Huh?
be, so I think it was a bidding issue that came up. It would have to be bid to the public. Why anybody would want to bid on a stormwater basin is beyond me, but it would have to go through that process.
The thought was, and I don't know if there's some exception, if it's almost valueless or something. Discussion I had with Dave focused on us having to get an appraisal to show that we can have the value.
Right.
Bid,
Yeah.
and we kind of just let it fall off at that. But-
Yeah, and I think that generated Tom's idea earlier.
Yeah, which we're fine with, so
Yeah.
it's less complicated. But I know that was the start of that discussion, and the thought was, well, just make it an easement, figure it out.
Yeah.
But we're certainly okay with the dedication.
Well, I'm not looking for it to be dedicated. That,
I'm just following Mr. Biles.
well, okay, so I do think it would be a lot cleaner if both halves of the single detention pond was in single ownership. And so I would like to encourage the township solicitor to figure out a way that we could do that. And, but then I would prefer to have the entire detention pond controlled by the homeowners association, that the township has a good bit of experience with oversight of private ponds and does have provisions to be able to step in if necessary and so forth. So that would seem like the cleanest solution.
Marty, did I hear you correctly? You think the HOA should be responsible for the detention center?
Yes,
Detention pond?
yeah.
Okay. You think that HOA is large enough to do that?
Well, they're making the detention pond bigger so they can use it. And so they would have to maintain, if they set up a separate detention pond, they would have to maintain that. And so it's just maintaining a little bit bigger detention pond. And the same requirements would apply if it needs to be naturalized and so on and so forth. And which would hopefully mean less maintenance. But the homeowners association would have to be trained on how to maintain the detention.
Yeah, I mean, you go from mowing it once a week or once every other week to 2 or 3 times a year, and that's it.
Yeah. So those are my only comments.
Sounds like you probably should go to one of the commissioner workshops and figure out what's going to happen with the road and what's going to happen with the basin. So, I know we can give a recommendation, but the decision is ultimately up to the Board of Commissioners. And you probably want those issues answered sooner rather than later.
That would be if you want to come to the one in February. That's the 27th, at 6 PM. If you're interested, let us know and we can make it an agenda item.
All right, any other comments or questions from the public? I think we have a number of issues that probably need to be resolved before we can make a formal recommendation to the board. So we'll take a motion to table at this time.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further comment?
I do believe that I'm gonna need an extension letter. And we're coming up on that where I don't think we're gonna have enough time. So
All in favor of the motion to table, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. We'll see you
Thank you.
maybe next month, maybe the month after that.
Thank you so much.
Tenacious.
Next item on the agenda is 7224 Mountain Road preliminary final subdivision plan.
Bud, are you by yourself?
Yes, I am tonight. Mr. Schenkel is out of town and he asked me to come on his behalf.
I know we've seen this one before, but Nate, if you can just give us an overview.
yep, I'm bringing it up right now. Sorry, it's taking a couple of moments here. So this is off of Mountain Road and Gaiman Road. The very large lot in question, we had an initial discussion with Mr. Schenkel about what the intent for the property was. And he noted to us that he is, as part of this minor subdivision, creating some estate lots, some farmstead lots, I guess you could call them, for residential purposes for family members. So you have two of them right here. This one, the dog legs, right off of Gaiman Road, and this one on Mountain Road. The primary homestead lot where the existing residence is this lot right here. The remaining two lots, this right here, at 75 acres, is essentially the South Mountain. The other lot in question, off of Mountain and Gaiman right here, is currently used for and is intended to be used in the future for active agriculture. So what the applicant would like to do is create these three residential lots for themselves and for family members, take the other two and essentially put them into a preservation status. Now, what the legal process of that would be, not 100% sure, but at this point in time, we understand that the applicant is talking with organizations for the South Mountain lot here, for that to be preserved, and for potentially, I guess we would speak with the county for agricultural preservation for the Gaiman Road lot here. Additionally, it was noted to us that this residential lot here will still contain zoning on it, still contain active agriculture on it at the front part. Now, sewer tests are currently being done for the residential lots to make sure that everything works out as well. But what we're here to note and discuss tonight is just the overall nature of it. And quite frankly, the applicant should be applauded. We need more people doing this, preserving the South Mountain and preserving active agriculture on the outer part of the township is exactly what we're trying to do right now as we focus development towards other areas and hard preservation such as this elsewhere. We do have some questions about the South Mountain area and whether that would be allowed for public access in the future, such as like hiking and the like. But beyond that, as far as I'm concerned, with the level of preservation that's going on here, I know that there's some requests for waivers. One, frontage improvements. We're talking about rural roads. There's no reason for sidewalks and curbs and street trees on rural roads. The rural road standards should stay in place. Our fees would be nominal at best for these residences. And the fact that they are preserving so much land in the interest of open space, that to me makes complete sense to waive that fee as well. One thing that we have been having discussions about is right of way. As everybody knows, we've been advised and the township feels right of way and ultimate right of way on state roads is on a PennDOT road is not something we want to get in the business of. And for our township road on Gaiman Road, it could and should be offered, but I don't expect to see any desire to have that taken. Again, in an area such as this is a township, we're trying to preserve it and not make alterations to what's already there. So that's where I stand. Our recommendation is to endorse the waivers at the staff level. But I do know that there's a couple of design issues that we're going to have to talk about moving forward as well. So I do want to hand it over to Brian to talk about that at greater detail.
Sure, thank you, Nate. One of them Nate already mentioned, which is sewer testing is ongoing. I think that can't really finalize this plan until we know exactly where the septic fields can go. So that's just one item that really is kind of holding this up right off the get-go. The only other design issue that we really have a concern about is just showing the ultimate right-of-way and how we calculate the lot areas based off of that ultimate. But that's mainly just, we just want to make sure that the lots as proposed meet the dimensional requirements of the ordinance. And showing that ultimate right-of-way is critical in doing that.
All right, but I think it's great what your client's doing in terms of preserving over 90 acres of land. I mean, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
He's very much into environmental and as I mentioned to Nate when we were talking last week, that he's been impressed with Wildlands Conservancy. So what he's thinking about doing here with this, and we met with Nate and Bruce about this, and he's going to enter into an agreement with the township to outline what he wants to do in lieu of these waivers. But he's very insistent about getting these waivers and not having any fees that he has to pay for it. But there's very minimal fees that we'd have to pay anyway, because he's the southern part of the project's outside the transportation service area, so there wouldn't be a traffic impact fee for that. On the north side, there's only one house being proposed, so that'd be the first exemption you'd get anyway, so there shouldn't be a traffic impact fee. The only fee that I think you would get would be a rec fee for the second lot on the south side, so he's asking for a waiver of that, but the open space dedication should more than offset that. The shape of the lot on the north side there, the L shape, is primarily because your ordinance does not allow for a flag lot. His son doesn't want to have his house out on the piece that fronts on across the street from Mobile Home Park. So he wants to be in the back, but I couldn't just put a 50-foot stub in for the house to be in the back. So I had to put a 150-foot minimum lot width along Gaiman Road. So we could actually reduce that if the township would agree to it, but we don't want to have to go through zoning to be able to change that. So that's why that's 150 feet. So his intent here with this, he doesn't want to dedicate any right of way. So we weren't proposing to show any ultimate right of way on the plans. And we weren't proposing to offer for dedication anything here. But he did agree that in this agreement with the township, that if the township needed to do some improvements or something, he'd be willing to give up property at that point in time. And he also did mention to us is that he was being impressed with Wildlands and stuff. If they want to put a trail across the property or something like that, he's willing to do it. And as far as control of the property, as long as he or a family member lives on the property, they would have some say in what happens on the property. But if the family moves off the property, he's thinking right now that he will, property will revert to Wildlands most likely. That'll be worked out in the details of the agreement that he puts together with the township.
Let's say that again, what you just said.
He as long as the family lives on the property, he wants to have some say, Bob, as to
Sure.
what happens with the property.
But
But
if they leave-
if the family moves off the property, he's going to set up this agreement that the property would go most probably to Wildlands right now.
Thank you.
Because he's had some dealings with them recently, and he says he's really been impressed with them as an organization, and
It's an impressive
that's the direction
organization.
that he wants to go with it. So, we're willing, when he gets back into town, in the beginning of March, we're going to sit back down with the township and work out this agreement.
So is the plan that you'll have an agreement with the township in place next time you come before the planning commission?
it's good. He still has, he has not gotten his attorney, an attorney involved yet. So it's going to be a matter of getting an attorney and sitting down with the township and finalizing this agreement. So I'm not sure, Tom, how soon that's going to take. The sewer testing is underway. They did the probes. We went into some weather problems. The perks are underway right now. So. And that I think is the only thing that's really holding this up now. Was a few comments that Brian had in their review letter that will.
It probably would
cleaned
be
up.
best if you had the agreement in place before you move forward with the subdivision plan. And I only say that because you're looking for waivers for fees.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think the township would want some guarantees that the land that's designated as preservation land is actually preserved.
Yeah.
I second that. That's really a concern.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think it's wonderful what you're.
Yeah, I can't commit him for anything,
I know, I understand.
So, but that's, my understanding, that's his intent.
I
So if we
did-
could just lock, you know, your client into preserving the land he says he's going to preserve, I think we would feel better about recommending
Yeah.
the waiver of those fees.
Or, or you can make it a condition that, because I think it is his intent of that, what he wants to do. And that's my understanding of his intent. But like I said, I can't commit him. So we'll get the agreement together and work that out as soon as he gets back into town.
There was a comment in the engineer's review letter about the setback for any homes being taken from the ultimate right of way. Is there a reason that you don't want to take the setback from the ultimate right of
Well,
way?
he didn't want to set up an ultimate right of way. I think I could probably get him to agree to say that the houses have to be set back the equivalent distance.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate right of way line is really a meaningless line other than that that's where the setbacks are
Yeah.
taken. It's not like he's dedicating land by showing an ultimate right of way line on the plan.
Well, it's a matter of calculating net lot area and stuff too. I don't think he wants to
He doesn't want to lose the net.
lose the net area. So, I think I could get him to say that we'll show the house setback, what would be the equivalent of measuring it from the ultimate right of way. We'll show a
Okay.
setback distance from the center line of the road that would equate to the same distance as measuring it from the ultimate right of way line. You think that'll be acceptable, Brian?
Ultimate right of way is strictly based off a definition, basically offset from the center line of road. It's 40 foot for a collector or 40 foot half width for a collector road. So it's literally just the definition of the zoning ordinance. If you're not going to show that stuff, you would need to go get a variance. I mean, if you're not going to calculate the lot areas based off of where that 40-foot right of way is, you'd need zoning, you would need a relief from zoning definitions to not show that stuff. It's one of those.
It's still part of the title property, though. It's property that he still owns.
Actually, yes, exactly. He still owns the property. Just because you show the net lot area calculated at X square footage doesn't mean he doesn't still own the right of way. He does. The point in time when he wouldn't own the right of way would be when the township takes ownership or accepts the offer. And the township isn't necessarily going to accept the offer anyway.
Well,
my
he
understanding-
he started this process. We explained it when we met with Nathan and Bruce. He started this process, I think he said 8 or 10 years ago, and he stopped it because the township was requiring that he, show ultimate right of ways and dedicate right of ways and stuff. He just has a strong feeling that, he wants to,
I think you should try to convince your client. It's a definition.
Yeah.
That it doesn't mean that the township's taking his property. He still owns the right of way.
Yeah.
Until the township takes the offer of dedication, that's when he would lose his property.
Yeah.
It's the net, he still has the gross lot area. He still owns the gross lot area. He doesn't, the net lot area isn't the same. They're two different things. And I think it would be very good if you could help
I've been trying to
clear up a
convince him,
minute
that
with that.
I've been trying to convince him he still owns the center of the road because of,
He does, yes,
yeah.
the township just has the right to traverse
Yeah.
it and the right to do maintenance.
now,
and
I spent 3 days at a seminar a couple of weeks ago that basically went into.
So it's not losing ownership of it.
Yeah.
The
I'll see what
township
I-
is
I'll
about
see
to
what I
get
can do.
100, almost 100 acres of preserved land I can tell you that staff is fully supportive in working with the applicant, however is necessary to ensure that we have a successful preservation of
Yeah.
this space.
I agree with
Was-
that, so long as you're sure it's going to be preserved.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe you can deal with the right-of-way, ultimate right-of-way issue through the agreement with the township.
Yes.
Maybe that's the way to deal with that
Yeah.
issue.
That we'll get together. When he gets back into town, we'll get together with Bruce and Nathan again. And if we have to get together with David or Mark.
It
we'll-
seems like a kind of an
work
insignificant
it
issue to
out.
be so worked up about.
Yeah.
On both sides, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something we will work out. He's a reasonable person, but this is something that just, for some reason, has him, very concerned. And I don't want to do anything that's going to mess this up because I think it is something that's good for the township.
Maybe that's why you want to get that agreement
Yes,
done sooner rather than later. Get all those issues wrapped up in the agreement.
yes.
All right, we'll open it up for public comment. I think we have two. Kate? Just clarified on the plan as it's the line shown, but it's not being offered for dedication.
The township doesn't take ultimate right of way. That's the policy right now. So if you want to assure him that as well.
Why don't you do that? Why don't you show the ultimate right-of-way line and just note on the plan, make it clear for your client that this is not being offered for dedication and the township is not accepting it.
And I'm even going to suggest he takes Kate along to the next meeting we have with the township.
All right, Mari, I think you had a comment.
Personally, I would prefer to have it offered for dedication. But, how many times, Bud, have I said that we'll grant you the waivers or deferrals, but we got to have some place to put it.
Yeah.
And so consistently, yeah, they offer it and they do not shrink the size of their land. And for the next 30 years, the township isn't going to want it. But what happens if a bunch of hotels go up around the ski resort or something like that? And, you know, you have to install a light at the intersection of Shonik and Mountain Road. So as I have fairly consistently done over the years, I would prefer to have the offer of dedication, and then I would be willing to waive all of the other stuff. Because, yeah, we don't, if we're going to put in a path there at some point, it shouldn't be something hanging over the homeowners or the, you know, so on and so forth. But you need to have a place to put it if you have to put it in at some time. So my proposal would be to have the offer of dedication, do what's necessary to convince them that the township's not planning on taking that offer of dedication. And PennDOT sure wouldn't take the offer of dedication if they didn't have to. So, and then waive all of the other stuff.
I think it's interesting that your client says that he would give the property up if the township asked for it and wanted it.
If they were going to do something with
They
it.
were gonna do something with it. But that's exactly what the offer is. It just says it's just there for if and when the township
Needs
may
it.
possibly ever need it. They won't take it unless they actually need it.
And it's a lot
Exactly
easier
what
to
he's
get the offer when it's one owner rather than when it becomes 5 owners.
Yeah.
So,
Maybe you can deal with that issue in the agreement with the township. Like, what are the conditions that he would give the land to the township?
Yeah. Well, let's see what we could do.
I would
I just don't
hate-
want to do anything that messes up the deal.
I agree with you. And normally we want the right of way when someone goes through the subdivision or land development process. That is, you know, a good practice for the township.
Yeah.
But in this instance, it seems like this land issue is a hot button issue for your client. And I would hate to see us get into this dispute about right-of-ways and ultimate right-of-way lines, and then your client decides to walk away from what is a really good deal for the township.
Yeah, and Tom, you know my position on it, when I was county maintenance manager for PennDOT Northampton County, we were able to fix things along the road because the township had an offer of dedication for the property owner. If I wouldn't have been able to get that right away, but the township had an offer, so I was able to get an easement through the township. So we went out and fixed the drainage problem or something because the right of way was available.
And it seems like your client walked away from a similar deal years ago because of this very same
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah, so we just want to make sure that that doesn't happen this time. So we'll see what we can work out. Yeah, and I think, Mario, it may have been too, when you're asking for fee instead of improvements too. May have been included, too. Remember those days? Yeah, if you don't put the street trees in, or go through the widening of the road, you still have to pay.
Talk to your client and
Yeah,
then
we'll
maybe
get together with Dathan and
you can
and Bruce
address
when he gets
the
back. in
right-of-way
town.
dedication issue in the agreement with the township in a way that your client feels more comfortable.
Yes.
Are there any additional issues you have, Bud?
No, I don't think so. I think that, it's just gonna be a matter of getting this agreement together and finalizing the on-lot testing to make sure that, the lots as we have laid out are gonna work with the testing. So far, what I heard back from the sewage before, the SEO is that things look okay. He thinks they're gonna get good tests.
Bud, did you request the waivers already?
Yeah, we did submit a waiver
You
letter.
you do have a waiver letter?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a way. Do you want me to pull it up, Tom?
No, I just want to make sure that he has that.
Okay.
We're asking for all waiver, of almost everything in the ordinance.
All right, but you've identified all the waivers in your most recent waiver letter,
I believe so.
right? Okay. Anything else, Bud?
No, not on this.
All right, is there a motion to table?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second to table. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion to table passes.
Thank you, Mr. Newton.
Thanks, Bud. All right, next item on the agenda is Prachi Realty, conditional use application for the property at 801 North Broad Street. Nate, you want to review the application with us?
Yep, just getting the screen share ready for you all here. So we've had several meetings with the applicant and their team with respect to the development of this site. It is immediately abutting Hamilton Crossings, and frontage would rest on North Broad Street, essentially at the corner of North Broad Street and New Street, as I'm sure as everybody knows, is really a very limited access street. I would go so far as to almost say it's about the size of an alley, but it is a street for frontage purposes for a couple of homes. To the south of this site is the mobile home community. To the immediate east is Hamilton Crossings, and to the north is Hamilton Crossings. This lot was zoned commercial some years ago as part of this, as part of some of the rezoning in the general area. And what has proposed as part of just a conditional use at this point, we don't have any formal engineering, is a 7 residential unit, 2 apartment unit mixed use structure, which is a conditional use in the West Coastville zoning district. The applicants have included a patio area out here on the front of along North Broad. There is a tot lot proposed. There is a dog park / dog run area proposed. There is a refuse area with landscaping and a masonry wall proposed. Some quite nice landscaping. And at the end of the day, I want to pull up the concept plan. There was an original concept plan. We now have a new concept plan for the site that meets our design guidelines for the township. We feel that the structure is actually looking quite nice at this juncture and is what we call transitional structure. moving in between the residential single-family homes and the higher density commercial use of Hamilton Crossings. So the structure is looking good. The site plan as it's laid out shows all those site amenities. A couple of planning comments. There is a solid fence that's proposed on the south side here. We would recommend keeping the existing trees and maybe throwing in arborvitae for the benefit of privacy for those folks. So that is a recommendation that we would have. Additionally, we have had this discussion on a couple of occasions with the applicant and with the applicant's representation, Attorney Durso. We recognize that there is going to be a challenge with pedestrian access to Hamilton Crossing. They're just not allowing it. It is something that we've even considered in the sample recommendation of requiring. If it is completely impossible, my recommendation to the Planning Commission is that the applicant install basically some deterrent fencing to make it hard to get down that hill to go over to the Chipotle or the Whole Foods, et cetera. And that is along this area here on the north side, where you would essentially walk right out and either come right down here or in any of these areas. Get a fence up. It doesn't need to be solid, but definitely make it not pleasant to try and get across. It is it's a health, safety, and welfare issue. So that could potentially be a solution if there's absolutely positively no way for connectivity there. There are a couple of other items, considering that this is a conditional use. There's no stormwater design yet. We don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know how it's going to be managed. We know that this is a challenging watershed. It's the same watershed as Hamilton Crossings. I'm going to allow Brian to speak to that at greater length. But again, like we do with every single project, resident access, emergency access, and stormwater are major priorities. And we have some comments with respect to those from our other design professionals. So I would like to note that we appreciate on the planning side, the site is looking quite nice. The structure looks nice. The landscaping is quite nice. Very satisfied from a planning perspective. The pedestrian connectivity, we got to figure out a solution for that just for safety purposes. Brian, if you could go into some of the more details with stormwater and site access. I think those are things that we do want to talk about on the design end to make sure that this is a successful development, given some of the constraints with its access to Hamilton Boulevard.
All right, thank you, Nate. So we did the sketch plan review for this site. We noticed that you have taken some of the items into consideration with providing sidewalk all the way around the building, the expanded dog park, and the full widening along North Broad Street. We do have substantial concerns relative to site access, and honestly, I think it's interesting in your notice of intent, general note 1 on your plans, talk about how mixed use is a good use in this area, specifically because of the direct access to adjacent shopping center and the valuable commercial use. And we agree that mixed use is actually one of the primary items in mixed uses is accessibility to walkability of the additional uses, access, pedestrian access, and we struggle because the site is not providing that. That's, like I said, access to Hamilton Crossings would really fulfill that requirement of that idea for mixed use. The use itself, it does kind of fit in with the commercial property because there's Hamilton Crossing on the one side and residential on the other. So it is kind of a transitional area when you look at it from a global perspective, but without that connectivity, it's really not meeting the intent of that mixed use. That being said, we're also concerned about vehicle access. As Nate had pointed out, North Broad Street is a small privately owned road. New Street is about the size of an alley. So we would recommend, there's no traffic light at Hamilton and North Broad Street. So motor vehicles are coming out to a stop sign at on a very busy road. It would be better and safer if they could actually utilize the intersection, the signal within Hamilton Crossing. Again, providing vehicle access to Hamilton Crossing would certainly be much better than putting cars onto Hamilton Boulevard off of North Broad Street. That being said, if that can't be done, we would suggest providing full improvements down North Broad Street, including the intersection with Hamilton Boulevard. So that addresses vehicles, pedestrian, and access. And then stormwater management. Nate had brought this up, again, not shown, not proposed, not designed, but the topography of the site is fairly flat. There's no area shown for an above-ground basin, which leads us to assume that there's going to be an underground facility. And again, this is part of the sketch plan review letter. The concern being with a flat site and a basin being underground, how are you going to drain that basin? So the obvious answer would be connecting to Hamilton Crossing storm sewer pipes because they are low enough to provide that outlet. So again, there's the concern that you'll need to go get sanitary sewer easements from the adjacent property. I think the applicant has discussed using level spreader along the property line. The concern is that that would change the drainage characteristics onto the neighboring property, which would also require approval from the adjacent owner. Again, Hamilton Crossing. So this application, without a lot of coordination with Hamilton Crossing, just doesn't. There's a lot of major hurdles, and majority of them are related to access and working with the adjacent property. Thank you.
Thanks. Attorney Durso, if you just want to introduce your team.
Sure. Kate Durso, Fitzpatrick Lensabuva, Jay Patel.
Jayendra Patel.
He is one of the property owners. And then obviously we have Bud Newton, and Max Patel is here as well as one of the property owners.
Yeah, I'd like to start with a little bit of history. Some of you folks may remember that when Hamilton Crossings was going through, Robert Bosick owned this property. And he originally thought he had a deal with Tim Harrison that would have provided access to this property from Hamilton Crossing, because he was supposed to be involved. You may remember, Bob, some of those discussions. We were in with some sketch plans at that point in time in front of the Planning Commission. And then when Goldenberg got involved, those plans fell apart. And Goldenberg wouldn't honor any of those previous commitments, and they wouldn't allow for vehicle access. They wouldn't allow for pedestrian connections through. Also, they wouldn't allow, there is a swale that's along the property line here on the Hamilton Crossings property that's supposed to take the water from this property, and that goes along the entire property from New Street, and there's several inlets, and there's an inlet right opposite this. We are going to contact them again about the possibility of connecting a pipe into that inlet, but previously they've denied those requests on other projects that we've had. If we can't get that permission, we are proposing to put a underground detention basin in the north parking field. This property, that part of the property will be raised up, and we will be discharging that to grade, and we'll be discharging to that swale area that will go to that inlet. And it's the only thing we can do, because that's the arrangement that they've made if they don't allow us to connect to their inlet. But it's, it's the bed that they made. I guess I have to say it's probably the bed I made, because I designed that part of the project. But it's a situation that we have. They're not willing to cooperate. They're concerned about liability of having connections. They don't want any additional vehicle connections into the property. They don't want any additional pedestrian connections. But I don't understand why they don't want other stormwater connections. I think it would be to their benefit, because it would possibly prevent, erosion and stuff. Because I think there is an erosion problem right now where Broad Street runs into their property. But we'll be able to pick up some of that water and take it into the system. I think we'll be able to help that situation. But we're not going to. To the best of my knowledge, every time we've approached them on this in the past, they haven't been cooperative. And it was unfortunate. That was one of the reasons that it took so long for something to develop on this property. And we are proposing to improve Broad Street in the frontage of the property. But we can't control what happens in front of the other people's property up and down Broad Street. And before Max and Jay got involved with this property, we met with the township, and we approached the township on the issue in the zoning ordinance for the direct access to an arterial street. And we asked, would Broad Street satisfy that criteria? And we were told it did. And I would not have recommended to them to purchase this property if there would have been some requirement that they would have to upgrade the entire length of Broad Street. This isn't a big enough project that supports that kind of improvement. So that's the history of it. I'll
Yeah.
turn it over to Kate at
Yeah,
this
I
point in
mean,
time.
we're not going to get anything from Hamilton Crossing. I mean, they haven't given anything to anybody. In fact, are, on another project of mine, are, almost to the point of trying to object to things that similar to the stormwater, even though there's regional stormwater. So I think we have to accept the fact that they're not going to give us a vehicle connection. They're not going to give us a pedestrian connection. I think we can look to what Nate suggested about creating some kind of deterrence. I don't think it's any different than what's being experienced out there now, as far as if anybody wants to go and try to get across the road. I mean, there's houses back there. There's the mobile home park. If they wanted to get there, they're going to figure out a way to get there. It's not any different just because we're adding 2 offices and a couple apartment units. The situation is what it is. That property was zoned WC when they did the rezoning. It was done with the intention that it is appropriate for it to be WC, which is a transitional area. It was done with the knowledge that there is no interconnection to Hamilton Crossing because it was done after that Hamilton Crossing project went in. We're just concerned that a project of this size can't support a full redo of North Broad Street. Again, we can do the deterrence to try to prevent some of our, people from trying to climb and cross, the highway. I guess they're going to need Chipotle really badly if they're going to do that. But again, it's an existing situation that anybody who lives on that Broad Street, and especially the mobile home park, is already experiencing. It's nothing different just because we're inserting a minor development in the whole scheme of things. I don't have any other suggestions on how to address some of the, we're not going to get anything from Hamilton Crossing.
Does Hamilton Crossings explain why they don't want to work with you?
It's a lot of the stuff that Bud has said, and I know that Nate can attest that the township hasn't had any success in trying to, coordinate something from them. It's liability. We don't care. We don't want to be responsible. I mean, it's unfortunate that when Hamilton Crossings went in with all the monies that were allocated for that project, that this wasn't taken care of and addressed at that time. Whether it be that they would have to allow somebody with there's existing inlets to go into the stormwater. Why they couldn't, as Bud alluded to earlier, you didn't provide some kind of access for the mobile home park or for that property that's sitting at, that's owned now by our clients. But they didn't, and they got approvals for what we see there today. And there's no incentive on their part to do anything. They're not, I mean, I guess the township would try to, hold something against them if they're trying to do some other additional expansions on the property, but I don't know that there's anything left there. And they didn't acquire the rights to the diocese land, off of Crocs. So it's not like they're coming in to get another bite of the apple to try to coordinate some of this. I don't know why they're just not willing to be, a good neighbor.
When Progressive Vision was going in, they, after they went in, they wanted to try to get a connection over to the pathway system that we had to get to the bus stop because they had a lot of people that were coming to their facility by bus, and they wouldn't even go along with even a connection to the pathway system that we had on the south side there to get to the bus stops. When Arby's was going to come in, we tried to get connection to the stormwater system. They wouldn't go along with the stormwater connection at that point in time. So we've made several attempts over the years to try to connect to it. But again, like I said, I'll try for the storm with here what we're going to do. We will, to be able to do, if we have to use the level spreader, we are going to have to raise that part of the parking lot. So we will have a grade separation. We will have a fence along that north property line, which will keep pedestrians from going out along our frontage there. That was part of the that was part of the deal when the project went through, because those pipes there were pipes that discharged onto the diocese property before Hamilton Crossings purchased the property from the diocese.
Yeah, it's anything that was sort of existing that went into the diocese, like some of there's some provisions for the one that's going into the Crocs, but nothing like here where there's nothing in writing, there's no easements.
Yeah, there were two pipes that went across New Street that went into, that were there prior to Hamilton Crossings going in, so they had to pick up those pipes.
Any comments, questions from the planning commission? Can you describe the configuration of the proposed building? You've got a mix of residential, of office. How is the building segmented into residential?
It's gonna be a two-story building. The first story, on the, south part of that, there's gonna be two units that are, here on the south side. This side on the first floor are gonna be two apartment buildings in the back, and they're gonna be ADA accessible. They're gonna have these garages for the ADA units. Then you're gonna have that central corridor that'll go in, and there'll be staircases up to the second floor where there'll be 5 apartment units. Then on the opposite side, there's gonna be the two medical dental offices. Jay's a dentist. He's gonna have his office. You want to flip to the north view? So you'll have the the dentist office on one side, and there'll be another professional office on the opposite side. So he'll have his office on the one side, and there'll be another professional office on the other side. So, you'll have the professional offices facing the shopping center, and the residential properties facing the mobile home park.
The second floor is all
All
residential.
apartments, yes.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
all the apartments have balconies to have a little bit of outdoor space and stuff for them.
Yeah, we tried to, after we met with Nate and Carl, have them make it a little bit more blending in with the neighborhood. So that's why you see some of the different design to make it look almost more like, townhouse, house type of look about it.
Now, the only entrance to the commercial portion is on the north side, right?
There'll probably be emergency exit doors on the east and west side.
East-west,
too.
yeah.
For just emergency exits, and also there's gonna be probably employee egress to that common area in the back too, because we'll maybe have some parking for the employees in the rear of the building.
But primarily,
side.
the residential, the people who are going to live there, they're going to be entering on the south side. They
Yes.
can't enter on the north side because that's for the
That-
business.
Yes. The customer parking is all gonna be on the north side.
Mm-hmm.
But there's gonna be some employee parking on the south, both sides. So we were very, one of the things that we asked when we had W2A design this is to get something that would, fit into the neighborhood, and also that the materials and stuff would kind of match Hamilton Crossings, and, would be the composite, and also that the building would act as a transitional zone.
Now, anyone traveling to this location or traveling from this location, they're going to have to use Broad Street.
Yes,
Correct.
There are really no other options.
that's correct.
That's correct. And we understand that the township desires to have us avoid anybody going down the new street.
What is the condition of Broad Street?
Broad Street's a local road. It's in fair condition. It's, it does serve as the major access to the mobile home park.
And what is
We did intentionally in the design of the site, we did make the radii and designed everything on site that the fire trucks could get through there and the garbage trucks get through there. We did have some discussion when we met with staff that, right now it's tough, the fire truck couldn't turn around at the end of Broad Street, so we designed the site to make sure that they could turn around in there. And I'm envisioning that what we're probably going to end up having to do is we're going to have to give the township we may have to give them a access easement maybe for the snow plows to be able to come on site, turn around, because there's no good way for them to turn around because New Street New Street was, when the subdivision of those houses and stuff occurred, the lots were sold out, but nothing ever happened with the streets. Predated all the zoning in Saldo. Boy, we found that was a problem with Quince and New and several of the other streets in that area. That, the property owners sold lots, but they never improved streets and there was never streets constructed. So, you have no man's land there right now for those alleys,
So the streets are private streets at this point.
private streets, yes. And new streets are very poor shape.
What right do you have to use New Street? It's all private streets.
We don't have, so we were, in the discussions that we had is we were gonna put signs on our driveways saying that all traffic must turn left, that people exiting the site have to go out on the street.
And I think the township was even seeking us to put a sign up just to say private road as well.
And how about Broad Street? What's your legal right to use Broad Street?
That is a township.
That's a
road.
township road.
Broad is a township road.
Broad is a township. road.
New is private, but Broad is a public
Yes.
road. All right. Let's open it up for public comment. From the public wish to speak?
What are we being asked to do? I mean, I'm sitting here just really worried as to whether this project, if it were approved, will survive. If it can't have proper ingress and egress. An accident waiting to happen. I don't mean to be overly dramatic. But what can we do to help, Kate and Bud?
Well, I don't think we view it as there being any issues for accessibility because we believe
Not-
that getting down Broad Street and being able to enter and exit into our site is not going to be problematic. We understand not wanting to put traffic onto New Street and preventing that from happening.
So you think Broad is adequate? You're not going to have a problem?
These aren't major generators. This isn't a 7-story apartment building going in here or anything like that. And the apartments on a daily basis would generate like 47 trips based on ITE. And the dental office will generate 85 trips and, PM peak hour, you're talking 15 trips for the medical offices, for the offices and, you're talking about, where am I here? Let me get the apartments. Apartments, you will generate 4 trips in the PM peak hour. So we're not talking a huge volume of traffic here. And Broad, you're not gonna have as anywhere near the traffic going in and out of here as you have in the adjacent driveway that goes in and out of Outback to the east.
As long as your applicant feels it'll work, fine. I've just expressed the concern and asked if there's anything further we can do about it. I don't see anything, but I'm just asking.
Yeah, we thought, based on the original discussions we had with staff on this before they got the property, we thought, looking at the West Coastville zoning and, that we thought that this type of use would be appropriate was what the intent of when you folks established that West Coastville zoning. It isn't overuse of the property. It was what was intended to go in there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go out and say that the size and scale that's being proposed on this property is quite reasonable. It is what we intended for West Coastville. It's transitional, makes sense. So from a planning perspective, again, we're satisfied. I think it's the technical items that we're just trying to figure out. The use, there's no issue with the use.
I agree. Maybe I'm got an overly restrictive view of the property, so I'll hush.
I think what the planning commission has to decide tonight is, do we want to make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners as to whether or not the conditional use application should be approved. And if we do want to make a recommendation that the conditional use be approved, then we probably should come up with some good conditions. We've heard some issues tonight. We've had review letters from both the planner and the township engineer. So we want to incorporate some of those comments in the review letters into the list of conditions. I think the two big conditions that we should talk about are, do we want to require pedestrian connection to Hamilton Crossings? We've heard tonight that the applicant said they tried to get a connection. It's not possible. Hamilton Crossings doesn't want to cooperate with it. So that seems to be a pretty big issue out there. We want to require it, recommend that it's a condition of the approval would be that they got to go get a connection that they're saying they can't get. The other big issue is vehicle access to Hamilton Crossings. It's in both of the review letters, Nate's review letter as well as Brian's review letter, that, boy, it's a really good idea to connect to Hamilton Crossing. This makes a lot of sense to connect to Hamilton Crossings. Seems like the applicant made a reasonable attempt to get connection to Hamilton Crossings, and Hamilton Crossings doesn't want to provide that connection. So we want to make that a condition of the conditional use of people, requiring a vehicle connection from this site to Hamilton Crossings. And then I guess the third issue is the status of North Broad Street. Should the applicant, sounds like North Broad Street may not be in very good condition. Should the applicant make improvements to North Broad Street beyond just the frontage of their property? We heard that they're going to make improvements, road improvements to the frontage of their property, but should the improvements on Broad extend beyond the frontage of their property? I think those are the three big issues: pedestrian connection to Hamilton Crossings, vehicular connection to Hamilton Crossings, and then further improvements to North Broad Street.
And Nate, if I heard you and Brian correctly, you're not, you're satisfied that they can't get the access from Hamilton Crossing, and you wouldn't put that down as a condition of the condition of use. Am I correct in my understanding?
Well, I think we're in a tough spot. Best possible option would be for that connectivity, but we can't make one side do something that they're not willing to.
Right. And I don't know about the Broad Street. I don't know. I hear them saying they can't afford to do more than what they've offered.
Kate, is there a timing issue on this one? If they tabled it tonight, just to explore the road issue and the pedestrian barrier, if you will?
No, there's not a specific timing. So if there wanted to be a pause and then we, between now and hopefully the March meeting, figure out some of these, he's not opposed to that. No,
And
he's not.
we don't know what the MPC deadline is, but you'd give an extension if we.
Oh,
need
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think we're okay on it, but.
We have the 90 days that started today. Yeah,
You just told me
we had
that.
90 days that started today,
Okay.
but if we need to do a buffer,
Yeah,
just to be safe.
Just tell me.
Okay.
Yeah. But we'd like to be able to come back in March. We can.
All right, so for the next 30 days or so, Kate, you're going to work with our solicitor and Nate
Yes,
to try to figure out some of these issues.
yes. We'll figure out, or some other, if it's preventing the pedestrian and as opposed to providing and that type of thing that Nate mentioned. And then we could be more specific of what types of, if it is the deterrent route, maybe we can focus in on what kind of deterrence we can do. And maybe we could take some more photographs or something of North Broad and get a better sense of what's out there. But yes, and I'm sure Bud will help.
Mhm.
Is there no one at Macungie Crossings that could give you an answer, like why they want to make it so hard to get customers over to their businesses? You know?
You know, I say the same thing to myself, because I would think it's not in competition with them. They don't have apartments over there. They don't have the offices. I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to try again. I have to talk to their attorney on something else, so I can mention it and see if maybe
Reasonable.
they have some flexibility. It's,
Rudy, we always thought that this would be a great place for some of those managers and stuff for those stores. Because a lot of those stores like Target, Costco, and Whole Foods and stuff, those managers change every couple of years. They move from store to store. So a place like this would be a nice place for them to.
Absolutely. And if they get a
live.
toothache, you know. We're good. Yeah.
I think we're gonna give some time
Yep. Yeah.
for,
I don't even know you need to table because it's conditional use. So whatever you need to do, we will take the time to try to see what we can do.
so we'll see you back next month.
Yes,
Sounds good.
okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Right. Only have one other item.
One more item, and that's the planning department report.
Yep, just wanted to give everybody a heads up that so the Board of Commissioners is looking to consider and I think gonna proceed forward.
Oh,
Oh.
Oh. Signature.
No, my legs. Well, I was sitting there. Yeah, yeah. The way I was sitting there, it's circulation.
that happens to me too.
Yeah. You gotta get more comfortable chairs.
Meetings would go on.
Yeah.
You didn't hit your head, did you?
No.
Get a card from Kate.
What's that?
Get Kate's
Yeah,
card.
like-
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we got the planning department report. And I think Nate, you were saying that there's an ordinance going before the Board of Commissioners to
Correct.
reduce the size of the planning commission from 7 members to 5 members.
That's correct. And on the other side, for the zoning hearing board, we will be proceeding forward with upping the number of members to 5 from 3. So that's at the recommendation of the board. That'll be before the board. They're looking to memorialize those 2 changes. Then essentially we'll be in a position where we're same across the board. 5 members on every board, everybody starting at 6 PM. So there'll be pretty much uniformity throughout the township.
The alternates, you know?
Nope. No alternates.
I think that means if you're not going to make a planning commission meeting, let Nate know. We
Yes.
don't have a quorum problem.
Yes, please.
And then no workshop next week, right?
No workshop next week.
And our next meeting is March 14th.
That's correct.
All right. And before we wrap things up, I just wanted to thank Bob Rust for his many years of service. Tonight is Bob's last meeting on the planning commission. Bob resigned. I think he's has some plans to move out of the township and spend some more time with his family. But I just want to say, Bob, you're a true gentleman, and I've enjoyed working with you. And I wish you all the best on wherever your travels take you.
Thank you, Tom. Enjoyed being part of it.
So I hope you get to spend some more time and with
I
those
do too.
grandkids and
You too. It'll take a little bit of time, but that's what we're working. Thank you.
so good luck to you, Bob.
I'll take that and run with it.
Are there any other matters to come before the planning commission? All right, is there a motion to adjourn? Is
So move.
there a second? All in favor? Aye. The meeting is adjourned at 8:46.
I changed mine to nay.
What do you want to
I'll
say?
change it to nay.